Alright, we actually managed a pretty packed week this week, so we ended up getting 5 movies in one form or another, so let's just go ahead and start with the Happytime Murders, which has pretty much been a talking point ever since the first trailer happened. It was my understanding that Henson had had this idea for a while, but like way back, like maybe half a decade ago or longer, it was planned as like more of a serious thing. I think that's what I heard, where it was supposed to be like this really serious mystery, like crime thriller thing, and just it would just happen to be that they would be puppets. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but it's pretty clear that I don't know. I mean, you've got like the Avenue Q thing. You've got when Peter Jackson made like Meet the Feebles, but apart from that, I get it's obviously not the same kind of puppet. You probably would throw Team America in there also, um, and you'll see like various things that are big reminders of those throughout this. While it does feel like it seems to kind of come from out of nowhere, when you're actually watching it, it is kind of surprising how much other ideas come back to you, and you think, well, maybe this isn't the most original thing ever, but it's so yeah. Obviously, when it starts off, we get the opening scene that basically sets up the whole there's humans and there's puppets thing, which is pretty much very similar to Bright, which we just had last year with the orcs and the human cops. It's basically setting up a racism allegory. And obviously you could say not a very subtle one, but I don't think subtlety is really the idea. I don't think that matters. But the thing here is that it is one thing for it to be really obvious, but then there's the other thing where it's like there's actually one particular moment where he just flat out says that it's racism because there's one puppet that got plastic surgery and his blue is a little lighter than it used to be. And when Melissa McCarthy calls this out, she literally gets called racist. So it's yeah. There's a point in time where you can defend it and say, well, of course it's not going to be subtle. Fucking look at it. But at the same time, you're like, well, maybe if they had just been slightly more subtle, it probably would have been funnier, which would have helped. But they went for it, so you can say that. Um, and it obviously revolves around. It does have a relatively interesting setup with Melissa McCarthy and the main dude who is Bill Beretta, who does like I think he does like the Swedish Chef and Pepe the King Prawn now, but he's basically this disgraced detective that accidentally killed somebody, of course, which we learn relatively late in flashback, but but it's still pretty obvious anyway. But and this incident basically led to a whole law that is even named after him, where human cops and puppets cannot be partners. And it's just a whole thing now, so there's this whole divide thing going on. And yeah, you can see where it probably started as like a serious idea, but then as time went on, they're like, we should probably just make this a comedy. And then I'm assuming that snowballed into, let's make it the raunchiest comedy we possibly can, because puppets. So yeah, it is sort of like it is kind of a one joke idea where you have puppets doing like, you know, the drugs in this sense are sugar snorted through Twizzlers, which is kind of funny. But then there's the whole, there's obviously going to be puppet sex, which of course has long since been covered in Team America more than a decade ago. So some of it does feel like you can tell they seem to really be reaching for it's funny and raunchy just because it's puppets, no matter how over the top it goes. There's obviously going to be an over the top well, maybe not an over-the-top sex scene, but an over-the-top, quite literally, climax to this sex scene that very much feels over-the-top in the sense of, like, the way the Wayans brothers have tackled this material, where the ending of a sex scene goes as over-the-top as it possibly can. But the thing here that the Wayans brothers did right that this movie doesn't is the fact that when the Wayans brothers did it, it didn't go on and on and on and on. Now, repetition, like, can be funny, where it's like, it can be something can be maybe funny at the start or maybe not funny at the start, but then if it's repeated, it could get funnier, and then the longer it goes, it's not funny, but then it'll come back around and be funnier than it ever was if it just keeps getting repeated. If it's well executed, that's not really the way this silly string cum joke goes. So it does just kind of feel like it's going on and on and on and on. And in a movie that already feels like they're stretching out one joke, it's yeah. So there are some things that I do like about it though, and there were moments where I did catch myself laughing, even if I felt like as far as the way the jokes were structured, I probably shouldn't have been, because technically the jokes fail, but I suppose no matter if you can't consider it a failure of a joke if you laugh, even if it's a guilty laugh, because it still happened, I suppose. If you're laughing because it's bad, that's a whole other different thing. But there was genuine laughter, so there is that. Like I do like the joke that cotton in this world is considered gore. Like I was wondering exactly how they were going to handle something like that, like in regards to how bodily fluids and otherwise happen in regards to puppets. And like I was like thinking, like, do they bleed? And no, they don't. They just explode into cotton, but it's treated as if they bleed. One of the funny moments is after the first little massacre in this porn shop. There's just cotton all over the floor, yet there's a human cop in the corner, like, gagging as he looks at it. So I do like the details like that. But then this also has, like, and there's also other stuff in there that I wasn't quite sure if it was intentional or not. I'm going to say that it was, because if it is, it's actually pretty clever. And that is that they do use the joke in the movie at some point to where when the puppets move their mouths, it's not exactly matching up, but you can, like, the mouth is at least moving with the sound, but she's saying that she can't read his lips because he's a puppet. But then there's this whole other way they use that, where he's talking to his brother, and his brother's the one that's had, like, a whole bunch of plastic surgeries, and his mouth is, like, not matching at all. Like, sometimes the voice isn't even going, and his mouth is still moving. And you can tell with how much experience these puppeteers clearly have. I'm going to assume that was an intentional joke to say that the reason his mouth wasn't matching the words was because of all the plastic surgery he's had. It's just fucked him up that much. Because I think he's the only one that's like that, so that has to be what the joke is. So I do like that. But then again, this is also a movie that's really desperately trying to earn its one of the raunchiest things you've ever seen card, which I don't know, like... We do have the scene with Michael McDonald, who I always love when he shows up, but who works with Melissa McCarthy frequently. But the thing here is that this movie also has those jokes where sometimes it feels modern, sometimes it feels like this script was written 15 years ago, and that's where the comedy still lies. Like how he has like these marble balls on his desk, and when he goes to reach for them, he says, "Don't touch my balls." And there's like 6 lines referencing that joke about those being his balls, and it's like this feels like it was written in the 80s, even 90s even. So jokes like that, they do also, some of them feel quite like they're from a script that was written a long time ago that just somehow did not change, and all the different changes over time the script went through, so there is that. Then there's like the guilty laughs, like the puppet named Goofer that is this really washed up, disgusting, trashy, drug addicted puppet that's basically begging. For some reason, there's a running joke that people keep mistaking Melissa McCarthy's character for a dude. I don't know. So Goofer, the joke is he keeps saying, you know, like, all he wants is 50 cents, and he will suck her dick. And just the sort of broken, frail way a puppet says this. That's one of the times where I felt like they kind of got away with the whole "it's funny because it's puppets" thing. So there is that. And there's also, which you see a lot with these movies where it's puppets and humans, particularly like Muppet movies. One of the things you always want to admire is the commitment of the actors. Like Melissa McCarthy, for example, who, once again, I haven't always been the biggest fan of, but really just the really straight-faced attitude she has, saying some of these things, saying some of the things that they are, on top of the fact that she's saying it to puppets. Like when she's investigating the murders and she says names like Bumbly Pants and Larry Shenanigans, she says it as if she's in like a full-blown drama. Now, Melissa McCarthy also has problems with playing things up a little too much, like making it a little too obvious that she's in a comedy when maybe she should be playing it more straight. Or these one-liners that just don't work. But still, those times where it feels like she's absolutely committed to making it sound as serious as possible, given who she's talking to and what she's saying, is one of the things that's always been great about watching human actors with great puppeteers like this. So that's always nice. Then there is one of I don't even know if this is a criticism or anything, but it's just something I noticed. I couldn't help but notice it just felt kind of weird and distracting that this is one of those movies that for some reason that doesn't really enhance anything in the movie, but for some reason this is one of those movies that has like a constant soundtrack. Like we're almost, if not almost, we are on the level of like Suicide Squad, where it's just like song after song after song, and it's like, how much of the budget of this movie was that for something that really doesn't even add to the movie at all? So that's just, like I said, I don't even know if that's a criticism, but I'm just throwing that out there. That was stood out to me, and maybe not the best way, but I don't know, not too of a condemning way either. So yeah, and then it also goes into well, I talk about how it does seem like they're really trying to cash in on the whole puppets doing dirty things thing, and that's about it. Like, it's one joke. But it does sort of make you realize as the movie goes on that the puppets are pretty much what makes it work when it does work. This is brought about by a semi-long portion towards the end when it's just Melissa McCarthy and Maya Rudolph for a while. And it's just like, they're just going back and forth and just everything is falling flat. There's this, for some reason, Maya Rudolph really wants a banana, and then she takes it and she eats it. That is its own joke. And it's like, you can clearly see that if they didn't have the whole puppets thing in this movie would be an absolute dead zone of comedy. So they're obviously bringing something into it, even if it seems like it's their crutch. The crutch gets them through the movie, at least, so it works to that extent, if not, always, and doesn't, like, completely elevate the movie to a particularly good status. It does keep it alive. Like, the movie never, like dies a death that it never comes back. As far as the story itself goes, I don't know how much that's totally working. It does have, like, these very obvious twists and turns that you can pretty much, see yourself to the end once these little things are revealed somewhere in the middle. There is one that just makes not a whole lot of sense why they even bothered, because, number one, it's brought about by the whole, I guess this is a spoiler, but it's like, one of the most obvious ways, like one of the most obvious indications that you're headed toward a twist later, usually is a car bomb. Like, that is the most unreliable death, probably in movie history. but when they end up using that twist, it, like, they reveal it, and then, like, 5 seconds after they reveal it, it just doesn't matter. And it's like they kind of just avoided it completely after it was revealed, and it was, I don't know what the purpose of that was. So yeah, so that's where it's like, if they had actually, like, gone out of their way to really make, like, a story that stood out in a movie like this, that would have almost, like I know that's probably the last thing you're looking for when you go into a puppets doing dirty things movie, but yeah, that somehow would have added, like, this weird other layer to it that would have made it, like, I don't know, given it, like, a more surreal quality or something, or something else that made it stand out in a way that made it feel different from the other stuff that we've seen like this. So yeah, so overall, like, it's not, like, honestly, I was expecting something, like, kind of, like, really, really bad from what I'd been hearing, but it's, yeah, it's, like, tolerable. It's really short. And it's, yeah, so honestly, it's probably exactly what you're expecting it is, one way or the other. So, Like, if you think you're gonna get a kick out of this, you probably will. If you think it's gonna be an absolute piece of shit, once again, you'll probably see it that way. So, yeah, I guess I just fall somewhere in the middle where I don't really care either way. So yeah, that's basically all that is. So yeah, let's go on to BlacKkKlansman, Spike Lee's new movie, and also probably the first real Oscar contender, at least of the ones that I've talked about so far. And it's sort of, obviously there had been enough time to where I heard quite a bit about it before going into it, but I still wasn't totally sure exactly. Like, it's obviously going to be one of those movies where you're not quite sure what's the movie and what's real life. But I would have liked to have read his book, but I unfortunately couldn't get my hands on it before this. But I actually am quite interested in it at this point. But we'll also go more into a little bit of controversy this seems to have stirred up in regards to what's real and what's not towards the end. But in the meantime, we might as well start at the opening scene. This very explosive yet also disturbing opening with Alec Baldwin basically throwing propaganda at our face in this perfect little Alec Baldwin way. It's clear that he's like... Now, obviously, not to get like too political or anything, which is a little hard to avoid when you're talking about a movie like this, but a thought could not help but cross my mind trying to get into Spike Lee's thought process. And it was like, I couldn't help but wonder if who Alec Baldwin is currently famous for playing on TV has anything to do with Spike Lee's choice in casting here in regards to this particular role. But it also sort of brought to my attention that it could also be that Alec Baldwin is just absolutely phenomenal with monologues, as shown by like Glengarry Glen Ross and stuff like that. So if you want to take a political undertone, apart from what's obviously being shown to you, you potentially could look in that direction, perhaps. But yeah, and this sort of immediately pulls you in this really big and drastic way, but it also, I feel like, lines up with... we're starting at the beginning, now we're gonna skip right to the end, which is, not that I'm gonna, like, spoil anything, but you may have heard that the very final scene of the movie is, like, a montage of, like, the Charlottesville stuff and all that. And a lot of people think that that seems, like, really tacked on, and it's just sort of put on there to, like, sort of sloppily tie what happens in the movie with, the stuff that's happening now, but I do think that there is something that sort of shows... Because when people say that, they seem to not mention this opening scene as well, with the war footage and stuff like that. And I think it's more so... It actually makes the ending work better that this is the beginning, because it does feel like it's not just jumping straight from the main events of the movie to present day. It seems like they're trying to cover, like, a whole history from, like, way back all the way to now. With the movie just kind of in the middle of it. I still can see where that might seem sloppy, but overall, I think it actually works quite well, but both sides of it. So I'm alright with the movie being bookended with stuff like that, but I do kind of see where that criticism comes from. And then, obviously, the movie itself starts after the Alec Baldwin stuff, and we do see this movie's sort of own variation of the based on a true story card, which is a nice way to shake up a cliche a little bit. And then we eventually go into this story that surely you're aware of by now, where Ron Stallworth, who was John David Washington, who obviously is Denzel's son, you can tell by his voice, absolutely, he starts off as, like, a cop that's just in the records room and all that, but he, for whatever reason, desperately wants to go undercover. So that kind of, it starts with him going undercover at these Black Panther meetings to make sure they're not, like, you know, getting really radical and out of hand, and then eventually ends up finding out about this sort of Ku Klux Klan resurrection by David Duke that he decides to infiltrate using a white voice on the phone, which, yes, does sound like another movie that came out earlier this year. That's also something we'll go into when we talk about the controversy, but in the meantime, so he's posing as this white guy on the phone when he talks to the Klan, or the organization as they call themselves, but So obviously when they infiltrate, they need a white guy to match that voice. And they decide on Adam Driver, who is a fellow cop. It's the two of them and Michael Buscemi, who is Steve Buscemi's brother, who you might have seen in, like, Gotham, among a few other things. You can definitely tell it's his brother. And then, yeah, but they also throw in different things in regards to where the hate from the Klan is coming from, because obviously it's not just black people, but also Jewish people, which Adam Driver happens to be. I think that's something that I heard was, like, dramatized for the movie, but honestly, it kind of works perfectly to really show those different angles, because I know a lot of people have accused Spike Lee of being a bit race-obsessed, and I can get where that's coming from, but it is sort of nice to see that we're getting sort of different areas here, and nice to see is kind of a weird way to put it when you're talking about what it is that hate groups hate. But it really, in regards to adding drama to the movie and adding some really great scenes to it, and scenes that absolutely add to the suspense of it all, because really, overall, this is just like, it feels more like it feels less like some biopic or less like some true story movie. It obviously has, you know, true details in it, but in regards to it feeling like an actual movie, which is really important, believe it or not, when you're making a movie. Where you don't just want to be, you know, a total documentary. You have to have, like, these suspenseful scenes, whether they're brought about by fiction or whatever. But, like, these interrogation scenes are the scenes that are, like, really powerful sort of in a quiet way. Like, when Adam Driver has been interrogated about, like, you know, they're trying to make sure he's not Jewish, so he has to say, like, the guy's trying to deny the Holocaust, and Adam Driver has to fight back by saying, oh, not only do I believe in it, I'm glad it happened, and it's like, I mean, of course. And then it's like, apparently this character has never really taken his Jewish heritage that seriously, like, it's just kind of something that's been in his life, but he doesn't think about that much. And there's just this really great scene when Adam Driver's great through the whole movie, of course, as he always is, but there's this one particular scene where he just kind of stops and thinks to himself. It's really brief, too, where he just kind of says that he hasn't really thought much about the fact that he's Jewish, and now that he's been doing this, he thinks about it constantly. And it just really is like this turn for this character, and you can see how going deeper into it is going to, like, affect him even more in a way that he would not have suspected otherwise. And there's actually a big portion in the middle there where he becomes seemingly more crucial than the John Day Washington character. Like, he takes more of kind of the foreground here, despite the fact that we do have, like, Stalwart does get, like, the love story with Laura Harrier and stuff like that, but also, and also some suspenseful scenes and a lot of, especially towards the end, for reasons that I don't want to say because it's too fun to watch the reveals, and watch it unfold, but yeah, a lot of the middle is devoted to the Adam Driver portion, where he's the one that's infiltrating. And it sort of becomes a lot like, it's a movie I like that people were kind of iffy on. It reminds me a lot of Imperium, the movie where Daniel Radcliffe went, like, undercover with the neo-Nazi group or whatever, the skinheads. It does feel a lot like that, but there is something, much as I actually like Imperium, there is something much more skillful about this. Like, you can tell it comes from a more seasoned director like Spike Lee. And it does really delve into just how just sort of creepily disturbing this all is in regards to where the hate is coming from. There's the one particular scene where two characters that become really crucial as the movie goes on are this guy that's in the Klan that's, like, the one that's, like, really antagonizing Driver the most, and his wife, who seem like this sort of average, almost sitcom-like couple. And then she sort of comes in, and she's the one that, like, she's, like, really... the only thing she doesn't do is come with a plate of cookies, and honestly, I'm starting to think maybe she did, come to think of it. And she's just really excited to be a part of whatever it is they're doing. And there's this really disturbing scene when they're laying in bed together, like you would see any married couple that's, like, really happy and all that. And she's just absolutely giddy about getting to kill black people. And it's, like, it's so surreal to just see this to where, like, if you could mute it and put any normal happy conversation over what you're looking at, and you would never suspect that's what was being said. And it's really, yeah, I don't know what other words. Just go with any synonym for disturbing, and that's what you get out of this scene. That's all I can really say, and it's, yeah. But then you get to the head of the group, which is a very interesting casting choice in Topher Grace as David Duke, and I was watching quite a few interviews with him because I was really curious, kind of just what his process was in general, and I guess he went to, like, he got, like, a book that David Duke wrote, which I guess David Duke has, like, a book that's, like, basically his version of Mein Kampf, more or less. So he read that, and then he looked up interviews, and he actually mentioned one that you can actually find on YouTube, where he was on Donahue, and it's, like, the disturbing thing was the fact that it starts off with the whole crowd, like, just hating him for who he is and what he stands for and all that, and the fact that he seems to think there's nothing wrong at all for thinking that, like, white supremacy should be a thing. And it's like, by the end of the episode, it's almost like just his charisma and his way of public speaking. It's almost like, not that he has the crowd convinced, but they're calmer than they were, which is bad enough. And in the fact that he sort of was able to get into this, he doesn't have, like, a shitload of screen time for a while, but then once it becomes crucial throughout it, he does, like, really take that on, especially when he's, like, on the phone with Ron, not realizing he's a black guy. And just the way that they do squeeze some comedy out of it, too. Like, they are able to take, like, the ignorance and sort of see the comedy side in it as well. To where, like, it's not some, like, totally, completely, you know, absolutely straight-faced thing all the way through. There are those moments where they actually see, like, that it just gets so almost ridiculous that it goes past disturbing and just into absurd. And he's able to treat that as if it's a scene in a comedy, especially, like, when he's talking to Topher Grace and, like, all the guys are, like, standing around the desk laughing at him. And it's... So I do like that there's definitely a balance, though. This is a movie that could have had so many tonal issues that he just handled so perfectly. Like I said, even if the beginning and end seem a bit tacked on and don't feel like they fit, I do think he definitely had a secure hold on this and knew exactly what he wanted to do. It felt like when you look at, like, when he made Old Boy, it's like you can tell that this is likely not... I didn't think that movie was bad. I mean, obviously it's not the original, but I don't think it's bad at all. But you can tell it's not exactly the movie he probably envisioned when he went into it. This is a movie where you absolutely feel like this is exactly the movie he wanted to make. And there's, like, no, like, interference anywhere. There wasn't, like, him being told he couldn't do something or he had to do something. You get a sense when you're watching this that this is exactly what he had in mind, like, the second he took the project on. Because it kind of surprised me to learn, apparently, he had not heard of Ron Stallworth prior to this. It was actually Jordan Peele that had to bring the idea to him, and then it sort of blossomed from there, and thank God that happened. Because we also have these really great scenes. Like, there's a lot of great individual scenes, which to me is a pretty key factor in what makes a movie great. Is you can just sort of pinpoint those moments throughout, and there's, like, so many scenes that they would stand out on their own if they weren't even in the context of a movie itself. Like the Harry Belafonte scene towards the end, where he just basically... We're cutting back and forth between him and something else, but it's just this really sort of great sort of, like... I think he's, like, in his 90s now, and just to see an actor like him sort of come into this and just have this one great big scene where it's just him talking and people listening to him, and it just makes for really good stuff. And, like, this is actually cutting back and forth between something that's, like, we're really going towards something that's, like, really suspenseful. And some people, I've heard some criticism that some people think the climax is a little too packed. Like, we're having two climaxes going on at once. Like, there's one really suspenseful thing going on while there's another suspenseful thing going on in a different place, and these things are coming together at the same time. I think that's, like, brilliant. That's a brilliant use of suspense to have these two things, and the way they cut back and forth so seamlessly, and how they'll eventually come together. I really loved the climax of this, quite honestly. So I don't think that was a problem at all. Um, and then of course there's the whole thing where they just sort of bring up like there's like a whole discussion of blaxploitation movies like Coffee and Shaft and Superfly, many movies I've talked about on here, Cleopatra Jones, and the way it's sort of like where she doesn't realize that he's a cop at this point, but they're still talking about these movies, and it's sort of like you can sort of see how like the movie when he is a cop and he and Adam Driver doing the infiltrating and stuff like that, it does sort of feel like story wise at least, and the way the events play out, a movie from that era. Maybe not as like, you know, big and exploited, but still it still sort of feels like it's in that sort of 70s cop movie era, which is a really good feel to have for a movie like this. Um, so yeah, so overall that's how I feel about it. But then there's also, I guess, there was a bit of controversy where Boots Riley, the writer and director of Sorry to Bother You, yeah, which weirdly is a movie I still haven't seen yet. It never came this way, unsurprisingly. But I do hope to get to it soon. But he apparently was really pissed off because he was saying that, I guess Spike Lee basically, he felt like Spike Lee sort of turned the narrative in ways that maybe it shouldn't have gone, or something like that, and they put basically he's pissed off it wasn't a damn documentary, is what it sounds like, to where apparently what he's saying is that there's the scene towards the beginning, the really well done scene, the very well made scene where he's infiltrating the Black Panther meeting, and it apparently Boots Riley was trying to say that that's more of what Ron Stallworth was about. He spent most of his time infiltrating those Black Panther meetings and much less on the Klan, despite the way the movie depicts it sort of in reverse like that, where it was all the time with the Klan and just like one Black Panther meeting. And the way that he basically saying like Spike Lee was like glorifying the cop characters or something. Well, clearly there's a couple of cop characters at least that are not glorified in any way whatsoever, and are even somewhat antagonists in little subplots. But, I mean, the cynical part of me wants to say this is a movie that is broken out and is a big Oscar contender about a guy, a real story about a guy, a black guy who used a white voice on the phone, which is the concept of Boots Riley's movie, which was a huge, big old deal when it came out. And obviously people do love Sorry to Bother You, but BlacKkKlansman is now sort of in the spotlight. That's the cynical part of me saying why Boots Riley would come out and be all against BlacKkKlansman, but if I remember correctly, it wasn't like he was trying to condemn the movie or anything, and he was just saying that I guess he was been out of shape, that he thought some of the facts were a little too far from the truth, but yeah, so that's basically what the controversy is. That's it. So it's so yeah, overall, this is something that I would consider great. It's one of those things where like, at first I wasn't sure how the ending montage fit with the rest of the movie and bringing the present day into it and stuff like that. But then once the credits came up and I was walking out, it felt like I had seen something great, and the more I think about it, just the better it gets. I can't wait. Like, I saw Crazy Rich Asians yesterday, the day after I'd seen BlacKkKlansman, and as much as I was interested in Crazy Rich Asians, it was so hard to not just go see BlacKkKlansman again, because I am aching to see this movie again. I really can't wait when that happens, so, yeah, so let's go ahead and move on to the movie I just mentioned, Crazy Rich Asians, which obviously is becoming, it's one of those movies that also is becoming like a really, really big deal. Like, I remember seeing, or hearing, rather, advertisements for this, like, a while back, and it just sounded like basically just a movie that was going to kind of come and go. It would have like a small audience, it might be well liked by certain people, and then it would just move on. Basically in the romantic comedy area, that demographic. But it started becoming this really huge deal because it started like becoming a part of this movie's identity, that it was, the first contemporary Hollywood movie with an all-Asian cast since The Joy Luck Club. Which is like, 20 years old, if not more. So that in itself is a big deal, and it's kind of it's sort of in the very similar fashion of My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and it's kind of gotten that similar slowly building reputation to where more and more people are taking to it. It's becoming this really big deal. It was #1 this past weekend. Granted, it did come out Wednesday, and everything else came out on Friday. But still, the movie is a big damn deal, is what the point is. Interestingly enough, and obviously everybody loves it. The critics love it, audiences love it, everybody's going crazy for it. Which to me was a little bit of a surprise, only because of the director attached to it. Because this is like the first good movie this guy has made, probably. In regards to, like, this is the guy that made that Justin Bieber documentary, Gem and the Holograms, and Now You See Me Too. The guy's reputation is not outstanding. By any means whatsoever. But there's something about his style that does really work for this, and it does make the movie feel, like, lively. Like, it does sort of... It is basically a traditional romantic comedy, but there is something about its style that I think is really making it stand out, and the way that it uses its location, the way it focuses on the character, which is something I may not have expected. You don't really expect from a flashy movie or a flashy director. But it is very easy to see what the appeal is. I'm sure some people will try to dismiss it as just, it's the whole diversity thing, but you can tell there's a real reason that people are really taking to this, and like a way that actually speaks to them, not just in that way. Starting right away with this very satisfying opening, when Michelle Yeoh comes in and she's got the kids and all that, and she's basically being dismissed from this hotel that she has a reservation for, and she's told to her face, "Why don't you try Chinatown?" And then the very satisfying thing where it turns out that she's actually going to be owning this hotel, and then the dudes that were going to dismiss her have to like go clean up and shit. So just immediately that kind of sets you up in a way to where it's like, okay, this might be more effective than other movies of its type. Movies that try to be feel-good, movies that try to have those big moments, but you can just see all their wheels turning and it feels really fake, and they don't really earn anything. And this movie has already kind of earned a reaction out of you in like its first 5 minutes. So that's a really good start. And then it goes on and we go into the whole romantic comedy setup. We see the girl who is a teacher or professor, I guess, and the guy who's kind of got she's going to go meet his family because they're going to go to a wedding for his friend, but there's something he's not telling her. And in any other romantic comedy, this would be the point to where he's going to tell her some big secret he's been hiding, and the girl's basically going to react in a really big way, a really tired way that we've seen many, many times before, and we're going to have to wait for her to say, okay, this is what this is now, let's move on. And usually it takes about half of, or sometimes if the movie's bad enough, a full movie for them to get to this point. But she learns, first off, that he's rich pretty quickly, and kind of suddenly, but her reaction is real, but at the same time, it's not, like, drawn out or overblown or anything like that. It's just like, well, so you're like royalty. And the reaction is basically just, won't that be weird when I get there and they see that I'm not that, and this is so not what I was expecting. I didn't know this 5 minutes ago. And then she just kind of deals with it. And that's basically what the movie is. It's basically her learning things about him and then just dealing with it and going along with it. And realizing that it's not the end of the world. And the great thing about it that the movie does is that it's not like... These are not where the conflicts stem from. Because once again, that's what a lazier movie would be. It would be like, why didn't you tell me about this secret life? Or it's like, something about the wealth would be what the conflict is. That's the thing that would come between them. But it's really not at all. It's just kind of what they are. And we just kind of have to go with that. I know it might be an infuriating movie for some people, to where it's sort of like the way people watch those reality shows about rich people, just to basically watch rich people being rich because it's what they'll never have, and that can be, like I said, infuriating to watch for some people. But this is a movie that sort of handles it in a way to where it doesn't feel like this really, sort of self-important kind of thing, like that concept might seem like it might go. Um, but there's also, I think it helps a lot that it's just kind of a general sort of feel-good movie. And of course it does have that there's like one consistent characteristic of feel-good movies, it is the presence of food. And this is another one of those movies like Chef or Babette's Feast or something where it's like there's a large focus on just how amazing all the food is, and it basically becomes like we get this whole montage where they talk about how like this place is so great that even like the street vendors earn Michelin stars basically. And so so all in all it just really sort of embraces the whole feel good angle and goes for that, and not necessarily just trying to figure out what the next conflict is going to be, which is what the lazy romantic comedies do, where they don't really don't really want to just kind of live in that moment, like this movie seems to do, where we get a lot of the scenery and a lot of the culture, and like I said, even the food goes into that, to where we're just seeing everything about this place that's great and all that. There's a lot of building montages and stuff like that, and it does work a lot. Like I said, that's where having a flashy director actually works pretty well. And that's not to say that the movie doesn't have a lot of issues. First and foremost, there's an actress that I've talked about twice this year, and now we're going on a third time. That's Awkwafina. This is the third movie we've talked about with her, starting with Dude, the Netflix movie, and then Ocean's 8. And in those movies, I wasn't a fan of Awkwafina. I can tell you right now, I'm still not a fan of Awkwafina. She's obviously playing this is where the movie does kind of get into the romantic comedy cliches, because you do have, she's the obnoxious best friend character, and just any time she's on screen is just, she's basically playing that character. Like I said, she's going to be that actress. She and Tiffany Haddish are doing this at the same time. She's the really obnoxious, overblown one, where just her breathing a certain way is supposed to be hilarious, and Hollywood is going to absolutely make sure that we think that by constantly shoving it down our throats, until it basically brainwashes us into saying, well, this appears to want to be funny, so let's laugh and say that it is. And that's how Awkwafina's going to get famous, basically. So but yeah, it just doesn't. She just really doesn't do it for me, unfortunately. But that's not it. Also, we've also got like the gay guy. We've got the Ken Jeong character. We've got the party guy. We've got the Awkwafina's creepy brother, or whoever he was, with the phone constantly recording people. And it's like this was the problem that I had with the movie, weirdly enough. Is we keep saying romantic comedy, and comedy is a big portion of that. Like, the movie is a comedy, just happens to have, all this romance stuff around it also. But the thing about it is, even throughout it, even when the movie was winning me over, one thing that was standing out to me was that I didn't think it was funny. It's clearly a comedy, like, absolutely. But I don't really remember laughing at much of anything, unless it was like lightly to myself once or twice. Like the big party guy was doing nothing for me. The brother certainly wasn't doing. I don't know where they thought that comedy was coming from. And it's like, this dude is being really weird, and that's the joke. But it would probably be funnier if the characters in the movie didn't also find him funny. Like, there'd be something in another movie. That might be the case. This guy does not belong in this movie. You could probably say that about most of the people I'm talking about. It does feel like this sort of jarring shift whenever we see these people. Especially, like, there's a moment that really was weird, where there is a conflict eventually. And of course Constance Wu gets all sad, and she has to run through the party like she's leaving. And the music gets sad and all that. And as she's running through the party on the verge of tears, in the background, you see the party guy running around with his pants down. And it's like, I don't feel like these things that are in the same shot should be in the same movie, let alone the same shot. And the Ken Jeong character also feels like a totally different character from a different movie. And so that's, yeah. But even so, it does still find ways to sort of win you over. Like, one thing in particular that really works is, when I was talking about where the conflicts come from, and it's like when they basically, they set up how stern the characters are about, you know, like, who's good enough for who, and, like, is she going to be good enough for him? Henry Golding, I think is his name, who I guess is, like, on the verge of being a really big deal. I think he's also in that new Paul Feig movie that comes out in a few weeks or something. But who is also, like, surprisingly good in this, for somebody I don't think I'd ever seen prior to this. And the thing about it, though, is we go into this whole thing about, you know, she's not going to be good enough for him. So says his mom, and then his grandmother as well. But the thing is like, the way they sort of set this up to where it's like a generational thing, to where, like, once we see her being really stern with the two of them, we see the grandmother being really stern with the Michelle Yeoh character, where she's like, the scene with the dumplings, where it's like the dumplings aren't good enough or something, and she's just sort of, like, looking down on her, basically, it feels like. And we see that it's sort of, Michelle Yeoh is pretty much projecting that onto them as well, and it's sort of this thing that goes down the line. And once they've established this, just when you think it's going to be, well, now they've established this, we're going to turn it on its head, and she's going to be accepting and all that, they double down on it. Like, just when we realize where it's probably coming from and why she's like this, it's like 10 times worse in the following scene, where she basically tells Constance Wu to fuck off. And it's like, that's kind of unexpected in that moment, because we've gotten to know the formula so much. So that was really refreshing to see, that the characters, like, really stick to their guns, even if we don't want them to. Just the fact that they do number one, makes us root for the couple even more, which is what we absolutely should be doing. But it also feels like the characters don't just feel like they're, you know, running around in circles because the script tells them to. It's starting to dawn on me now that I actually like this movie more than I realized. Because when I came out of it, it was kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's a bit overblown, maybe it's a bit overhyped. For a comedy, I didn't think it was funny. That's a pretty bad sign. But everything else it does too well for that to be too much of an issue, I think. Even though Awkwafina does keep coming back in and grating on our nerves as much as she can before she steps out, even though she'll eventually be back, even so, they do handle that stuff quite well. It does feel a bit thin. Like, it does feel, like, story-wise, it's like we do still kind of see the familiar beats, and there's really, story-wise, there's not much going on that we don't know is going to happen. And they do try to throw in subplots, like, the girl that, like, leaves the fish in her bed and stuff like that, which sort of seems, once again, also kind of like a jarring turn. But weirdly enough, less of a jarring turn than the big comedy guys for some reason. So, take that for what you will. Comedy guys and Awkwafina. Take that for what you will. But then there is something that it does feel like, the fact that we feel for them does absolutely, you know, elevate the genre itself, and does kind of get past that. I was a little afraid going in that I wasn't going to be able to get past the fact that it was still, you know, at its core, formula romantic comedy, but they do enough that actually does separate. And like I said, just the use of location really helps too, and the way some of these setups, like the wedding itself, is like this really, it's just something it's like really hard to describe. You just kind of have to see this wedding to see this whole production design and how that goes. So so they do stuff like that really well. So yeah, maybe I do like this better than I thought I did. So the comedy characters were just leaving a really bad taste in my mouth. And like I said, a comedy being not funny to me, it seems like it would be totally damning, but maybe not so much, because they do handle the romance angle and the characters really well. The characters that do work really well. So yeah, it's, once again, like I said, it is a movie that's like a really big deal right now, so it is gonna kind of probably suffer from overhype a little bit, but overall, it does work quite nicely. So yeah, I'm okay with that. Let's go ahead into Alpha, a movie that I feel like has been advertised forever. I think there was like this teaser trailer going around for a long time that didn't really say much. But it basically was setting up this whole thing of it was the dawn of dogs, or wolves in this case, being man's best friend. And it was going to be some like big sort of epic, however long ago. I think it's like 20,000 years ago or something. And it's basically the start of the man and dog relationship, with Cody McPhee getting lost in the wilderness and befriending a wolf. A story that we've seen a billion times over, maybe not necessarily in this time period, but still, once again, familiar beats that we can see, at its core. But even so, the first thing that struck me, once again, much like Crazy Rich Asians, was the director. The director is Albert Hughes, the other half of the Hughes brothers, who made, like, Dead Presidents and Menace to Society and From Hell and stuff like that, who have since gone their separate ways. Alan, the other brother, made Broken City by himself, which obviously was not good. And then this is Albert's solo outing. Significantly different from what they've done before. Not only is it significantly different from what the Hughes brothers have done before in regards to what it is, but also the fact that it is being promoted as being kid-friendly, which is something that you definitely can't say about the other Hughes brothers movies. So, what we have here is it does feel a bit... It felt a bit odd at the start, like almost like the storytelling was going to be a bit too modern for being a story 20,000 years ago, by the way that it has this opening, this big, Buffalo Stampede opening, where somebody gets hurled off a cliff, and then it does the 1 week later thing. And it's like, for some reason, when I think of movies set 20,000 years ago, I don't really think of the 1 week later, 1 week earlier card. It feels more like, sort of like those old teen comedies where it was like, we start, and then he says, like, oh, let's go back to the beginning. It's like, it seems weirdly out of place in a movie like this, but, yeah, so of course, we do get to know, the Cody Smith character and how he's being built up to be this big hunter like his dad and all that. He's going to be the leader of the tribe and stuff like that, the alpha of the tribe, if you will. But the problem is that he, he leads with his heart, not his spear. So we pretty much know immediately where it's like, it's setting up all the clues immediately. Not like we don't already know where this is going to go, but still, it does feel very, very much like it's following a formula there. So, and then of course, because once again, obviously, he's going to eventually... They get into a discussion about how, the wolf is like the alpha of its pack and all that, and then he has to do these certain things to be that, and it's like, is he going to be that? And then it's sort of like, the only thing they don't just flat out say is, this kid and this wolf are going to have the same journey, and that's going to be their bonding point, because they're both, the thing that's supposed to be the alpha, but they've been separated from their group and all that. It's all very spelled out in a movie that doesn't have any English dialogue in it. Weirdly enough, they actually do commit, and this movie is entirely subtitled, which was kind of surprising, especially for a movie being promoted as kid-friendly. Not that there's a lot of dialogue, just pretty much in the first half. Though that is also sort of surprising that... Another thing that the advertising may not be telling you is that it's probably halfway through the movie before he even meets the wolf. Or at least before their bond starts. So the thing here, and it does have like a relatively short runtime, which we'll get into in a minute. It's like an hour 35 or something. Which for movies set 20,000 years ago, usually, they're a bit longer, so there is that also. But the thing about this is that it does sort of show you, it does sort of have this interesting misdirection where you do think that the opening scene is going to set up what the ending's going to be, but it's actually just setting up when he meets the wolf. So we come full circle a lot quicker than we think we're going to, which is, once again, an interesting case of misdirection, if nothing else, really. And then, obviously, we do get this moment where he's been hurled off a cliff, and he's, like, hit the stuff on his way down. So he basically, with Cody McPhee here on top of, not speaking much and hardly in English, and then having to basically be on this journey with just an animal, more or less, you almost feel like there's going to be a lot of this performance is going to be inspired by DiCaprio in The Revenant. Sort of like I feel like he watched The Revenant at least a few times, DiCaprio in The Revenant, before he took on this role and gave this performance, and so there is something like that. But then there's also the main thing that seems to be getting the movie attention, because this surprised everybody by getting like rave reviews from critics, because it just seemed like the farthest thing from that, especially since I think it had like a lot of delays. It was supposed to like come out like almost a year ago or something probably. But I think one of the things that really comes from that would be the way it's shot and just the way it looks in general. It's surprisingly well done. It's a lot more. It's a lot more. No offense to Alan Hughes, but this is a significantly more prominent solo effort for the Hughes brothers in regards to what Albert's doing here. Because this does go like really big and like really grand and all that. There's like, it's one of those movies where it's a journey movie and there's a lot of like just endless desert or snow or whatever, and we just see the characters just in these really gigantic landscapes, and it makes the movie really feel like it has this huge epic way about it. And the way they some of the stuff is shot also, whether it be CGI or not. It's like early on there's a dissolve into a waterfall that's really well done. And this is a movie that can make eating a worm look really, really cinematic, which is really interesting. And then there's probably the most memorable scene in the movie. Naturally, the kid's going to get stuck under thin ice and have to go underneath it. But the way they shoot this, because we get like from above shot of him underneath the ice, and then we get a shot of the wolf from his point of view under the ice, and then that looks good enough. But then we get this one full shot where the top half of the frame is the dog running on top of the ice, and the entire bottom half of the frame is under the ice and him underneath it, and it's this really great big shot. Like it's how they even accomplished that, I'm not sure. So stuff like that definitely does make the movie stand out. If this movie wasn't shot like that, it probably would not be memorable at all, to me anyway. Because there is stuff like we do have, like, they do set up, you know, how empty everything is and how big and vast it is and how alone he is with just him and the wolf. So like every now and, not a lot, but every now and then it'll cut back to his parents, and that feels like really jarring when that happens. Like they really probably could have done the Castaway thing and just made it solely this sort of one-person thing with a wolf, without cutting to other things. And they do that rarely, but even so, that makes it even more jarring when it happens, honestly, that they do it rarely. So there is that. And there's also the use of CGI when it comes to the animals there's definitely a contrast. Like, you can tell. I mean, they're well animated. It's just when they're like, they're well animated, but when you can see them contrasting with real life, there's an obvious sort of fakeness to it that's really unfortunate. And so that's really all the movie is. And that's the problem, is that I would go as far as to probably say that it's too short. It's like, it probably could have done more with more than an hour and a half runtime, and then it's like, it ends too early, but it also starts too late. I do like the idea of there having enough build up to his character to where he doesn't even meet the wolf till halfway through the movie. But even so, it doesn't once he does, it doesn't feel like there's enough time left to do anything that's like really, really stands out. Like obviously there's the thin ice scene, sure, but something that goes beyond how well it looks, because it does feel like just this very sort of vacant, like, oh, they're both, you know, alphas from different places on the same journey and stuff like that. And it does feel sort of empty for the most part, just really well shot sort of emptiness, unfortunately. Because it does feel like, with how much clear effort was put into the making of it, you would think it would feel like there was more to it than that, but there's just sort of yeah, like I said, just sort of something that's missing. And I think that's due to the fact that it just felt so sort of swift in how it was handled. It's just, as soon as we get there, it just feels like it's getting closer and closer to an ending when it feels like we've just started. And so that's, yeah, and we do have, the sort of, it does feel a little rushed, like we do have, like his change in particular, to where he feels comfortable enough with the wolf to basically, push it away if it's trying to take the rabbit he just killed. And then when it gets to the stuff to where it's like, it's those usual sort of cues in, movies where a kid finds a dog and all that. There's the sad scene where he tries to get the dog to go away, and stuff like that. But overall, though, it does stand out. It does stand out in a way into how it looks and how well made it is. It just kind of sucks that there's not more to it than that. So, but yeah, it's a hard movie to dislike. So I'm not even close to that. But yeah, I do feel like there could have been a lot more to it, though, and I do think a bit of a longer runtime. Not like, don't make it like over 2 hours or anything, but a bit longer of a runtime, maybe an hour 50 or something, could have made it, flush itself out a little more, and we would have had more of, yeah, the stuff that would have made it. The story portion would have been able to match up with the visuals that we got, basically, is what I'm trying to say, I think. I don't even know anymore. So let's go on to the last movie, which is Bad Samaritan. This is a thriller that came and went very quickly. It didn't even come around here. The closest it came was like 40 minutes away. I think I remember hearing like one trailer for it. And just remembering it was like some thriller with David Tennant in it, and that's pretty much all I know. So, with that in mind, I started to wonder when this started if I even had the right movie. Because we have this opening scene with this kid and this horse in slow-mo that is just laughable. It's like, it just looks ridiculous, it looks cheesy, it looks way over dramatic, and it seems like it's not connected to anything. And he's like beating the horse, and then he shoots it, and then we cut to something just seemingly on an entirely different planet. Where we start off with these two characters, a guy and his girlfriend, and at first these seemed like the most terrible of actors. Especially this actress. I don't know what she's done before this, but like, to think that she probably went through an audition process and managed to get this part, I have no idea how that happened. And then this guy who just seems to be sort of, I guess, bad by association. It just seems like it seems like the opening scene of Get Out with Dana Kaluuya and Allison Williams. If Dana Kaluuya and Allison Williams were the worst actors on the planet, is what this opening scene is, and without the whole racial stuff. Just them being boyfriend and girlfriend and stuff like that. But then as it goes on, this actor seems to be much better in the thriller portion of the movie. The romance section, not so much. It's like it brings out the worst in him. But when this movie is a thriller, this guy is fine. And it turns out this was a false alarm, that this might be one of the worst acted movies ever. It was just like the first 10 minutes where I was like, oh shit, what is this? But once it kicks into gear, this movie doesn't quit. Which was really surprising given that opening. It was like, I did not expect to be as into this movie, like, 10 minutes after I was ready to write it off as, well, this is not going to be good at all. It did not take long at all for me to give this movie a chance, because once it gets set off, it goes for it. Even if it is still, like, a routine thriller with some ridiculous things in it, it's gonna hold your attention, believe it or not. It's really damn fast-paced. It moves like a damn bullet. And it has an interesting setup, if we've seen it before. If you've seen the extended version of Bad Santa, there is a scene where Billy Bob Thornton is working as a valet. Or he's not working as a valet, he just happens to be passing through. And he goes and he picks the keys off, and he chooses the most expensive-looking car. He finds out their address, he goes to their house, he robs their house, and then leaves. And that's basically what the setup for this movie is, is that extended scene from Bad Santa, where these two dudes work as valets at this really nice restaurant. And they take the cars, they go to the people's houses, they rob them, they bring the cars back. doesn't seem like a foolproof plan at all, but for a setup to the movie, we just go with it. It's fine. Because the shit will hit the fan. Even though we're surprised this plan hasn't gotten them in trouble yet, obviously that's what the point of the movie is it does. So, we do go in some directions here well, it's the way it unravels, where obviously David Tennant pulls up and he just seems to be this douchebag, but because he's David Tennant, we know he's probably doing something super fucking sinister, which of course he is. And long story short, he's got a girl chained up in his computer room. But it's like this whole weird sort of cell thing that he's built. Sort of not dissimilar to what Stephen Lang was doing in Don't Breathe, just without the grossness factor. And then basically, the movie stems from one wrong decision that this guy makes, to where he's this close to saving her, and then he chickens out. And it becomes this really interesting character trait that drives this guy throughout the movie. Because usually in these sort of routine thrillers, the question you're asking yourself is, why would the main character keep doing this particular thing? And I like that this movie sets that up really early by putting this decision on him, this bad decision that haunts him, to where he was this close to saving her and then he chickened out and ran away. And that's what drives him, is the fact that he made that wrong decision and he has to right that. And that's what's driving him to do the things that he does throughout the movie. And I think setting that up early really helps getting invested in this movie. And like I said, you get invested in this pretty fast for the kind of movie that it is. It's pretty impressive, actually. And then, of course, it does become predictable to an extent in, like, the first half of it, because it's like, while we do get to a moment where, like we get to the moment where he calls the police, and the police show up at David Tennant's house, and they knock on the door, and he answers, and they question him. But it's like, this is only half an hour into the movie, and it's like, we know half an hour into the movie this is not going to get solved, and the cops are not going to figure it out. So we know there's not a lot of suspense in this scene, because we know he's not going to get caught yet. But still, it does keep you intrigued as to how he's going to get out of it, and what's going to happen after that, and what the main character is going to do about that. There are some of these cases, like, the way he gets out of that, there's something very vague there that the movie doesn't really go into that they probably should have, and it does feel like almost like an easy way out. But even so, even when those moments do come up where it does feel like, moments you can be very critical of, where it does seem like, because the more intriguing a thriller is, usually is based on the less they take the easy way out. That's what keeps pulling you in, but still, the way it's set up and the way it unravels exactly what's going on, and when it chooses to show you exactly what the motives are, or maybe not show you what the motives are, it's just enough to keep you hanging on. And like I said, to keep you hanging on enough to where, like, the runtime goes by in a flash. The movie's like 1:50, but feels very, very fast. So that's, I can't express that enough. I'm saying that a lot, but it's true. And so there is all that, but then there's also stuff like some of the traits they throw in. Like, every now and then there's a little detail. Like, I sort of like the stuff like, to sort of amplify David Tennant's douchiness. There's this moment where, like, and it's the thing. I think the thing about it is they don't draw any attention to it whatsoever. It's almost like something that's on one side of the screen, but it's when they when obviously just in time, obviously they get David Tennant's car back to him once he's leaving the restaurant, and just on the other half of the screen as the guys are talking, if you watch, you can see that he drives away from the curb and just right through a red light. And just nobody mentions that. So little things like that, I always really liked it. They sort of add to characters also. And they throw in some creepy details too. Like when we see the girl he's held captive in like a different cell, she kind of walks towards the wall, and we see that we're not quite sure where she is or why she's here, but we just see on the wall there's little carvings, and some are like tally marks, and then there's one that just says help. So it's like we're not quite sure how long he's been doing this or why he does this at this particular moment. Unfortunately, when we do find out, the explanation is pretty stupid. Because it does have to do... Because we're talking about the horse thing at the beginning. The way they bring that back into it. To where it's like... They hint at it throughout the entire movie in the most blatant of ways. Because he's got a horse bust. He's got a horse painting on his wall. He's got a picture of a horse as the background on his computer, on his desktop. And yet the explanation for how these two things tie together, the horse thing and what he's doing, it is so fucking dumb and so not worth all that build up to what the hell is the horse thing. But especially when that scene just brings the movie down so much, made me think the movie was going to be absolute shit when I first saw it. That kind of stuff. It's like making everything like unexplained would have been better than what they came up with. It's really unfortunate, but overall, they do like there's some things to where it's like the casting of David Tennant, for instance, where it's like the scenes where he's being interrogated in his apartment and he's like trying to cover up all the clues and kind of give himself an alibi. It's sort of like, this is the kind of character that you should absolutely hate and that you really want to see get caught. But the thing is I guess David Tennant is, like, too charming. Because it wasn't real, like... Towards the end, he is, like, going full crazy and full over the top, and then you can't give a fuck. But when he's, like, being the dude that's, like, very calmly getting himself out of these situations, you almost find yourself, like, rooting for him to get away with it. I don't know, like I said, I don't know if that's David Tennant's charm or what it is, but... I did find that kind of interesting. Maybe that's also kind of an upside of the movie also, but you also sort of have these things in there that just seem like they don't belong at all, like when they get replaced as the valets, when their plans start to come into the light. And it's like, there's the guy that replaced him as a valet that he has to go up to is weirdly confrontational. In regards to being the guy that has his job now. And it's like, this is a character that we're never going to see again. We know this. He has no purpose, really, except to be the reason that they no longer have their jobs as valets. And it's like, that was a weird addition to make that character as prominent as they did for that one moment where he's still pretty meaningless. So, yeah. But overall, it obviously doesn't come together as well as it should. There's also these details, like, they sort of, I guess it's to make his character seem smooth or whatever. I guess David Tennant's character has, like, an endless supply of burner phones. Because, like, every time we see him on the phone in his car and he's doing something sinister, the next thing he does is throw his phone out the window. And it's like, there's people, like, all around him, there's cars behind him and all that. And it's like, there seems to be a huge sloppiness factor here to a guy that's got all of his shit so planned out. So it does feel like it goes into lazy, generic thriller territory a lot. But it does keep your attention, weirdly enough, throughout most of its runtime, which, like I said, is almost 2 hours. And that's, yeah, so... and it does have a very, very sloppy end, also, which is, you know, typical for thrillers. Even the best thrillers tend to, like, have a reputation for falling a bit apart in their last moments. When we get to a climax, but yeah. And then it does seem like it gets to moments where, like, Tennant's character starts, like, messing with his Facebook and, like, humiliating his girlfriend and stuff like that, and it's like, at this point in the movie, I feel like this character is capable of so much more than hacking into this dude's Facebook. But that's pretty much, before he goes, like, you know, full crazy and over the top and all that, there's not much of a transition there, so it's, yeah. But weirdly enough, if there's one thing this movie does, and you wouldn't think these sort of, like, cheap-looking thrillers, you wouldn't think of this, but this movie actually is pretty skillful in the jump scare department. Like, there's probably, like, 3 jump scares in this movie, and all of them are actually pretty well executed, and they don't feel cheap, which is very interesting. They're actually really well done, so, yeah, there's actually a lot to like about this, but, I mean, overall, it's still a pretty dopey thriller at the end, and it does make you still have a lot of questions going into it, and it does feel like the writers got a bit sloppy, but for a movie like this, being able to hold your attention the way it does still makes it pretty successful, but then again, still, at the end of the day, it is just a regular thriller, so if that's your kind of thing, though, this is probably, like, totally something you'd be into, so... yeah. So that's what this was. I think next week I'm gonna I'm gonna do another of the. I'll catch up on the. Damn it! I'm gonna catch up on the Netflix stuff that has come out since the last one I did, and we'll see if they're getting any better. I'm gonna doubt it, but we'll see what happens. And I already have the verses playing this week too. We're gonna stick with comedies actually, so we'll see what happens with that. So yeah, so until all that's done next week, that's it.